Thank you for your patience. We were just making sure that all 9 teams can share their slides. We have a kind of big event planned today. We're really excited that you all are here. Sort of the idea behind this event, right, is that we're going to highlight the work of our social equity U-Link teams, but also kind of draw these connections between all of these teams' work and this year's selected One Book, One You text. So you want to talk about race. So each team will have about 10 minutes to present. These will kind of be lightning presentations highlighting their work. After that, we're really excited to have Dr. Zinzi Bailey here. She's going to sort of draw these connections between the teams and the selected text. We're going to save all questions till the end. If you want to throw questions in the chat as you're thinking about them, feel free. We'll kind of be moderating that area. But we'll also allow you at the end to unmute your mics. So it can just be kind of like an informal conversation. So excited to see everyone here. Is the Vice Provost on the call? Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Ali, thank you for a wonderful introduction. I'm really excited about this partnership with One Book, One You. I'm not going to take any time offering further words because I really think the content of the different U-Link teams and also the facilitation by Zinzi are what everybody came to see. So thank you, and I look forward to our participation.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. Okay, so our first team, their team title is Anti-Racism and Climate Justice Dialogues to Build an Interdisciplinary Course and Research Inquiry. And our presenter here is going to be Professor Armin Henderson.
Great. Yes, thank you for having me. The title is quite a mouthful. So with that said, let me share my screen. Okay. So as stated, well, first of all, thank you for having me and hosting our team. And this was a great event for us and a chance for us definitely to start to unpack some of the problems that we see within climate change and environmental justice and how they intertwine with racism in general. So firstly, our team is made up of multiple people from different specialties. As you can see, there are people from the School of Education and Human Development, the School of Law, the School of Atmosphere and Science. Of course, I'm from the School of Medicine, and also from the School of Science and Policy as well. And I think one of the reasons that we were so interdisciplinary is because we see climate change and environmental justice and racism not being solved, the big problem of the intersection of all those things solved by one silo. And so it really gave us a chance to showcase how we can come together and pretty much solve this problem from our different perspectives.
Armin, this is Ashu. Sorry to interrupt you, but when you're projecting, it just appears as a black screen. Can you exit out of the full screen?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Can you all see it? No?
Negative.
No. Oh, it's still black screen.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
I think this is fine.
Yeah. All right, we'll do this. All right, so I'll just do it from here. But as I was saying, let me go back. I hate that. Okay, so basically, we approached it from a multidisciplinary perspective. There are individuals from multiple schools that are in our team. These are some of the pictures of those individuals. As I said, we wanted to solve the problem from an interdisciplinary approach. And so we thought it'd be important to have people represented from each perspective and viewpoint of how they see climate change, environmental justice, and how they intersect with racism in general. And so let me go to the next slide. So our team goals were, number one, to create a climate and racial justice talk series in which we have multiple peoples from multiple levels of government to community organizations and also to grassroots organizations as well, and talking about these issues from their perspectives. We also wanted to create community dialogues around these issues as well. We are creating a podcast around this so that people can listen and pretty much learn from the individual talks and from all the perspectives. And it gave the students a good chance to showcase their perspective of climate change as well and environmental justice. And then we also had a climate justice grants scholars program in which we were supporting community initiatives that were already ongoing. And then lastly, I think our biggest goal and most lofty was to create an interdisciplinary climate justice course to be given at but also pretty much open to the community, we hope as well. And I'm going to be talking about some of these things more in depth. So some of the events that we've had so far was with Harriet Washington. She is a world-renowned speaker, and she basically was able to give us her perspective on cascading disasters at the intersection of underserved communities. And you know, her perspective and her talk was very, very well taken. And it was a great inaugural event for us to show exactly what we wanted to do. We had some really intimate conversations with her. And if you missed it, you know, we hope to recap some of those things in the podcast that we have as well. Then we had a talk with the Miami Climate Justice Leadership. We invited individuals from government, from community organizations, and from different institutions, FIU and to talk about what they can do from the grass tops level and how they see, you know, climate change and racial justice intersecting with their everyday jobs as leaders of institutions and government organizations. And then we brought it down basically to the grassroots level, and we talked with some climate justice activists as well. And one of the themes that really became apparent was that a lot of people don't address the role of capitalism in climate change and climate and environmental justice, and the things that they like to see moving forward. And then our last one that we have coming up on May 3rd is around energy and housing justice in a changing climate, and how that affects vulnerable communities, and how it's intersected with things like redlining and things of that nature. And I think that pretty much rounds out all of our events. So, I mean, if you can, I would say please try to join us on May 3rd. They've been very, very interactive conversations, and we look forward to those, to the dialogue, continuing the dialogue even after the events are over. These are some of the individuals that we've had so far. Again, Harriet Washington is to the far left, but you know, we've had other individuals as well who have come and talked to us intimately as well. And you know, also all the artwork that we used a community organization called FemPower, and they were very instrumental in allowing us to bring our vision to life in terms of, you know, from an art perspective as well. This is us on some of those talks. I guess everybody's visual, so it's good to say hi to individuals who we see. But these are also some of the individuals from our Climate Justice Scholar Grants program. We had a weatherization program in which, so first of all, we sent out basically applications to individuals throughout the University of Miami, and we told them that there were specific problems that we'd like to address and asked them if they would like to be a part of the grant program. We had a bunch of applications, and we chose some really, really outstanding individuals to be a part of it. And they're going to take on different projects within weatherization, within the Miami Energy Task Force. And of course, you see that these are community organizations that are leading some of these charges. And then lastly, in the Disaster Resilience Project, which is where I work, you know, I guess I can talk a little bit about, you know, the disaster team. Basically, after Hurricane Irma, individuals in the community were basically asked what type of ideas they want to see brought to Miami-Dade County. I think thousands of individuals were interviewed as part of Radical Partners 100 Great Ideas event that they had. And one of the main things that kept coming up was that they wanted to have a team. They wanted to have a focused team of individuals that can help them be more resilient during disasters. And so that's basically how the Dade County Street Response Disaster Relief Team came about. It was something that the community directly asked for. And so now, you know, including, you know, we educate physicians and medical students and community, you know, people, leaders to step up and pretty much help lead the charge when it comes to disasters before, during, and after basically hurricanes. But we also staff, you know, shelters all throughout Miami-Dade County during emergency situations, and we continue to build out that with the emergency management team at the county level. And we are the voice of the community during disaster. And we hope to basically bring that project to life and export it to different states and also different countries who are having similar problems and looking to organize their community around disaster as well. So that's just my project, but other individuals on our team have really, really good projects as well that we hope to present and bring to you once they're finished as well. So the last thing is our interdisciplinary climate justice course. This again will be across schools. Again, we represented like 4 or 5 schools within the University of Miami. Our topics again are capitalism, colonialism, exploitation, advocacy, but also intersecting movements, climate, energy, environmental, and also racial justice. And one of our main goals was really to portray climate change and environmental justice, not just as an issue that white people are just hugging trees, et cetera, but also as a racial justice issue. And I think large organizations like Movement for Black Lives have really started to take this on, in which they are creating a red, black, and green New Deal. And a lot of our work will be included in their national platform for racial justice around environmental, climate change and environmental justice as well. But we also hope to include readings and show the intersection among science, communities, and societies as well. So it's really exciting that we are undertaking this. I don't really think that there's anything like this out there yet. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, these are just some of our extras. This is the wonderful artwork that we have portrayed by FemPower, cascading disasters. As you can see, a lot is going on there. And we look forward to the dialogue. We look forward to learning more from each other. And we were just really happy that the university allowed us to undertake this cause. And I'm looking forward to seeing what other individuals are doing as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Armin. This is really fantastic.
No
Let's
problem.
move on
Thank
to
you,
the
Jen.
next project, and we'll take questions for you later. So next on deck, Will Pestle. The project team is building Native American and Global Indigenous Studies at UM. Take it away, Will.
Thanks so much, Ali, and good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Will Pestle. I'm a professor in the anthropology department. I'm presenting today on behalf of the proponent of this particular proposal, Tracy Devine Guzman, who has a legitimate excuse. She is teaching undergraduates at the present moment. Will be joining us in just a little while, hopefully. We're intending with this generous ULink funding to try and build a program that intentionally focuses on Native American and global Indigenous studies here at UM. As it pertains to today's topic, right? We would note that, you know, while indigeneity and race do not sort of map one-to-one onto one another, although at various points in the history the two concepts may have, indigeneity, indigenous identity, indigenous status does refer to a whole constellation of lived realities that have concrete implications for the lives of Indigenous peoples here in South Florida, in the United States, across the Americas, and indeed the world, right? And so obviously it falls within sort of the greater footprint of this pursuit of social equity, social justice. Our efforts, right, grew out of some observations of some needs, right, within our UM community. The first and most obvious of which was the gross underrepresentation of Indigenous voices at all levels of the university community. And just to put some numbers behind that based on fact book data, Of our nearly 18,000 students, only 24 identify as Native American. This doesn't include perhaps people of indigenous origin from the international community. Only 3 out of our 3,200 faculty identify as Native American, and only 8 out of 13,215 staff members, right? So these are groups that are fundamentally underrepresented across the university. Nonetheless, there are numerous faculty members who work with indigenous peoples around the world or on topics pertaining to indigeneity across UM's 11 schools and colleges. And there are indeed many long-lasting individual level partnerships with indigenous nations, communities, and peoples. However, UM to date, right, lacks a scholarly hub to articulate these different folks doing research and teaching on matters of indigenous studies. And this prevents or promotes siloing in a lot of ways that I think are counterproductive and that ULink seeks to remedy, but it also denies any formal educational opportunities for UM students who are interested perhaps in pursuing a degree, a major, a minor, a graduate certificate in that area of study. Last but not least, we noted the lack of institutional partnerships with community organizations, with indigenous nations, with communities at sort of the highest levels of the university's infrastructure. And so our goals in this project are twofold. One, to begin to address the lack of indigenous representation within UM. And two, to make the indigenous past and present of South Florida, of the hemisphere, of the world, just a more meaningful area of engagement, scholarly inquiry, and education for all the folks who call UM home. And to do this, right, we have proposed, and we will be proposing formally, right, the ULink funding specifically funds us sort of a year of information gathering and proposal building to establish an interdisciplinary program in Native American and Global Indigenous Studies to be housed within the College of Arts and Sciences. First and foremost, the goal of this incipient program is to begin to remedy the lack of indigenous voices at UM. And we're going to do this by building on the really successful model that we have for other interdisciplinary programs in the college, things that include Latin American studies, gender and sexuality studies, Africana studies, et cetera. These programs that have track records of fostering collaboration and teaching and research, touching on a wide variety of issues. And our hope is that by standing up this program, we can, in the long run, right, in response to the ULink's call and the president's charge, to hopefully generate new knowledge and new solutions to these complex and long overdue questions about oppression and discrimination as they relate specifically to indigeneity. So what have we done to date with the Provost's money? Well, since the fall, we've tried to build community, and that began with building a core working group of 12 people from the College of Arts and Sciences, from the Abbas Center, from the Rosenstiel School, UM Libraries, and the Lowe Art Museum, as well as an Indigenous community liaison, Carolyn Laporte, who's a UM Law School alumna, a member of an Anishinaabe tribal member, and an attorney currently working in Indian country. This working group began sort of setting the agenda for how we were going to go about building the program and some of the programming that I will talk about here shortly. But they also began reaching out to friends and colleagues who they knew who were also working in Indigenous studies writ large. And we have, over the course of the last months, convened a group that's nearly 200 people strong of faculty, students, staff, and indeed members of the broader South Florida community who have a vested interest in seeing something like an Indigenous studies program started up here at UM. We've also taken the first steps in the last 6 months of building linkages to, for example, the Global Indigenous Forum at FIU. One of our working group members, Tracy Ardren, has been taking the lead along with personnel from the Lowe Art Museum of building a joint declaration across the Lowe, the Atatiki, which is the Seminole Museum, and the Miccosukee Indian Village Museum. And we've been invited to collaborate with MDC and the Freedom Tower on the land acknowledgement event, which is a central issue to many of these programs and obviously to many of institutions thinking about who the land that they operate from once belonged to. The second and really one of the most exciting things that we've done over the last several months is to solicit Indigenous perspectives in the form of 6 live streamed events featuring artists and activists and scholars who've come and spoken to dozens or hundreds of people via Zoom, speaking not just on their own research or activism or art, but who've also given us pointers and direction in terms of the areas of the most scholarly need as they see it when it comes to Indigenous studies. Now, if you missed these events live, they're all archived on our website. I'll show the address of the website at the end of the presentation. You can go and catch up, for instance, on Betty Osceola, a Miccosukee environmental activist talk, Shannon Speed, who's a Chickasaw anthropologist working with Indigenous migrant women detained at the US border, Lorene Roy, who's a librarian and educator in Anishinaabe, a tribal member from the University of Texas at Austin, Virgil Ortiz, a Puebloan artist working primarily in ceramics, Mary Catherine Nagel, who's a Cherokee attorney and acclaimed playwright, and most recently, Sonia Guajajara, who's a Brazilian Indigenous politician and environmental activist. And I encourage you, again, to go check out these recordings on our website if you have the chance. And there will be more events in this vein coming in the early fall. Second, we really put a lot of effort into building sort of the curricular or pedagogical core of this academic program. This was kicked off by an inaugural course offering taught by the aforementioned Carolyn Laporte, which was entitled The Introduction to Native and Indigenous Peoples and Perspectives, Stories of Resistance and Resilience, which is currently wrapping up in the spring semester, has several dozen students from across schools and colleges at both the undergraduate and graduate level. And ultimately, this course is intended to become kind of the core course for the curriculum of the Indigenous Studies program. We've also attempted to bring together and present again on our website additional courses as they are listed by various departments that speak to matters of indigeneity. And so, for example, for the fall, we've identified 7 existing extant on the books courses that speak to Indigenous studies that students could take in pursuit of a major or minor, what have you. We have, however, also much like Dr. Henderson just spoke about, used some of this ULink money to try and seed creation of new courses through what we've called course development grants. And these have gone out, there's a call to across the university for scholars to develop courses in their area of study. And as long as it foregrounded Indigenous studies, we were kind of agnostic as to the discipline, the region, or the time period. We've awarded 10 grants to faculty in the Abbas Center, at the College of Arts and Sciences, School of Communications, School of Law, School of Nursing and Health Studies, and the UN Libraries. And just to give you a sampler here, we have great titles like Colonialism and Indigenous Women's Health coming from the School of Nursing and Health Studies, Indigenous Women's Rights coming from the School of Law, Black and Native coming from the English Department in the College of Arts and Sciences, and Indigenous Cartographies and Cartographies of the Indigenous coming from UN Libraries. The intent is that these 10 courses, along with the 7 or 8 that are already on the books, will form the curricular core. The real work lies ahead, however. So this summer into the fall, we're going to begin assembling the formal packet that needs to be approved by all levels of the university bureaucracy for the development of this program. We intend to start somewhat small with an undergraduate minor and a graduate certificate that will come formally online in the 22-23 academic year, although we are offering an independent minor, which is a thing that exists within the College of Arts and Sciences, for students starting next year. We have begun conversations with our Dean in Arts and Sciences, and boy, would we love to have conversations with decanal authorities and other schools and colleges about commitments to hire tenure track faculty with priority and emphasis to be placed on the recruitment of Indigenous scholars. And again, at sort of an institutional level, we need to begin working to partner with community folks to think about how to build structures for recruited and retaining Indigenous students, which is a major issue at universities and colleges around the US. If you'd like to keep up or pitch in, please go to our website. It's fantastic, developed by Nicole Cornix and Meryl Shriver-Rice. The videos are there, all of our future events. You can always email us at magis@miami.edu. And I just want to say thank you to the ULink, the provost, to Vice Provost Kobitz, and to the amazing staff, Ali and Eva in particular in the Provost's office, who have given us support as we've bungled our way through a number of administrative and financial things. So thanks so much to all of you.
Thanks, Will. That's awesome. Next presentation. This is going to be Professor Ashu Argwal, Joint Academic Nurtureship for Underrepresented Students. They're calling it JANICE, a Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics, which is STEAM initiative. Thanks, Ashu.
Hey, Ali, thanks for having me. And, I just want to say from the previous speaker, in College of Engineering, we're actually learning from the guidances that Arts and Sciences has put out to recruit faculty members, tenure track faculty members who are in the underrepresented minority stream. So that's really helpful and very positive that's come out of Arts and Sciences, and COE is already learning from it. So my presentation today is, again, as has been the theme, a huge team effort. We have launched in full earnest starting spring this semester, a paid research internship program for Black undergraduates across many different disciplines at the university, with the hypothesis being that the students who often come from socio-economic backgrounds which are not as nurturing often have to do on-campus, off-campus jobs in addition to the undergraduate education here. And that prohibits or precludes them from working in research labs in a full immersive manner. And we wanted to remove that choice for them. So we we solicited applications from Black undergraduates across engineering, neuroscience, psychology, biochemistry, molecular biology, Miami Project, people who had interest in Miami Project to Cure Paralysis, cancer, across every STEM related field that I had sort of friends and family in. And out of those applications, we've selected actually 12 undergraduate fellows now who have been matched one-on-one with these host labs, and where they're being paid a fairly good amount to work as a research assistant. And they're getting exposure to research so that they can immerse themselves in hands-on learning and supplement what they're learning in the classroom. This enables their med school applications, grad school applications, job applications. Amongst themselves, they're developing a professional networking and peer networking group. There are there are chat groups that I have started amongst with all of them, and I meet with them one-on-one every Tuesday and Thursday, actually in person now, so that's to just keep up with their lives and to see how they're doing. And in return, they have been asked and they've been paid in collaboration with two excellent programs at UM with Black high school students in the Miami-Dade County Public Education System. So I was very, very lucky to get in touch with Dr. Wendy Cavendish in School of Education Human Development, who runs the Inspire Youth program, and Dr. Keely Stewart in the law school, who runs the First Star Academy, both of which through partnerships with either the Booker T. Washington High School or the Miami-Dade County foster care system have Black undergraduates who have been, oops, the difficulty listening. I'm sorry. Ali, is the audio real bad?
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Sanjeev, I wonder if it's your internet connection, but I can hear you fine.
I'm sorry if it's at my end. It could very well be. I have multiple things going on to keep the toddler busy at home. So, and you can probably hear her. And so we are hoping that these current Black undergraduate students who are in STEM immersive programs can help demystify college for these real at-risk populations, especially from the First Star Academy. And I'll talk more about that on my last slide. Now, the third part of the program is to develop, and we've been quite slow, I'll be honest, on this session, on this effort, which is to develop weekly wellness sessions. And these are meditation, breathing exercises, even yoga, led by Dr. Luntheda. And we had hoped to develop, and we haven't done this yet, a digital humanities 30-minute sessions online, which we could expose our undergraduates to and the PIs who are mentoring these undergrads, but also, if appropriate, expose our Black high schoolers to. The funding from this obviously has come from the VPR office from ULink. Some funds have come from CTSI, and we're very appreciative also of funds that have come from the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. And in fact, I've submitted reports of progress to Sylvester as well, and we're hoping for their continued support. So, with this very, very simple idea, we started pitching a large tent. I had started having conversations even before the ULink solicitation from faculty members in BME. We had sort of started an informal DEI committee within BME. This was over last summer, obviously, with all of the things happening in this country, led by Tomei, Courtney Dumont, Prasad, Zibat, and Andy Dykstra, who's on the call and who's actually a PI on this team as well. And then outside BME, within every engineering department that we could think of, I had started having conversations. Then I got really lucky again, hooked up with the student leader of National Society of Black Engineers, Taylor Washington, who was on the news UM communication recently because she created a digital version of a Black History Museum. And then with her help, I really launched this program, as I said, solicited about 40 applications. And then out of those, through a real imperfect science, and I'd be curious to hear Dr. Bailey's input on this at the end of this program, on how do we actually select people? what are the exclusion criteria we use? And I use criterion of like something that I made up in my head, which is real imperfect. But nevertheless, I was stuck with this task of selecting and rejecting 30 or 30 odd kids and selecting 10. And these 10 students, are really working very well now in these research labs and have started having conversations with high schools. And that's what brings me to my, I think the more consequential, the more significant part of the program, which is selection of these high school mentees, right? And as I said, these come from either most of them, 7 of them come from the First Star Academy, which are the foster care kids in the Miami-Dade County system, grade 9 through 12. And, they have their cell phone number, my undergraduates, my Janus undergraduates have their cell phone numbers and emails. Email never works, so they're like constantly texting back and forth. They're having in-person conversations also starting next week when the classes finish and summer begins. And the hope is that they will just talk about issues like college, money, life, adulthood, STEM, and bring them on to these host labs and then have them actually work and do some like experiments so that they can get that sense of science and hands-on activities. And really what on an overall scale, if we zoom out, what we hope to get out of it at the undergraduate level is really easy. We want them to have these immersive research experiences that we know from loads and loads of educational literature leads to better learning. These technical and soft skills do lead to better professional outcomes, and the mentoring experience when they mentor the high schoolers and they see a change in these high schoolers, will help the undergraduates themselves build perspective on their own lives, their careers, their importance, and their self-worth. For high schoolers, again, there's only 2 things we want. We want the high schoolers to get exposure and to get access. Those are the 2 things that will help demystify college. And then these high school mentees will be able to associate a Black name, a Black face, a Black voice, and a Black experience that they can associate with, and then spark love for research discovery. Now for UM, I really hope that UM realizes, or its vision of culture of belonging for Black scholars at UM and extends UM's impact beyond its walls to the community. But I really also think that, at the provost level, at the dean's level, there is not a model of paid research internships. Arts and Sciences has some programs, but they're not, customized for Black scholars. And this tiered mentorship program where the undergraduates serve as a tiered mentor to high schoolers also doesn't exist. So I hope they're able to find resources to keep this sustained. Obviously, we are looking for funding opportunities from NSF. And with that, I will stop here, Ali. I'll give some time back, I guess.
Thanks, Ashu. I think we can list your daughter as an honorary
co-PI.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. I want to see her. No, you're
you don't.
All right, let's go to the next presentation. I have Professor Jennifer Kahn. She's going to talk about their project Anti-Bias Training Across the Data Life Cycle, Project Data Inclusion.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Everyone can see my slides? Yeah, okay, great. So hi, my name is Jennifer Kahn. I'm an assistant professor from the Department of Teaching and Learning. I'm the PI on Project Data Inclusion, Anti-Bias Training Across the Data Life Cycle. And I'm joined today by another one of our team members, Chingwan Chuan, who's a research associate professor of interactive media. She's on the call. And so we have a brief presentation to introduce our project to you all. All right, there we go. So our project addresses the role of systemic discriminatory bias across the data lifecycle, which has become an increasingly pressing issue to address. We see bias in the data lifecycle as a cross-cutting issue for both Black Lives Matters movements and the COVID-19 pandemic. Systemic inequities that live in all parts of the data lifecycle perpetuate disparate health and life outcomes for women and communities of color. So that is, bias persists in the collection and generation of big data, to the processes of data analysis and modeling, including AI and machine learning operations, to the stories told with big data and the data-driven decisions that are made. These inequities transcend discipline and are visible across major social issues such as disease and healthcare access, policing, race-related stress, and exposure to pollution, just to name a few. And despite a growing awareness of the lack of representation in large-scale data sets and a growing commitment for data science fields to address issues of data ethics, there's no standard educational approach to address discriminatory bias across data professional fields. And so our project goal is to use our respective expertises in clinical practice, research, and teaching to develop an intervention that can address the role of systemic discriminatory bias across the data lifecycle, targeting specifically health and educational fields. So here you can see where our team's respective expertises lie across the data lifecycle. We all share a commitment to inclusion and equity and have experienced and/or witnessed the consequences of discriminatory biases embedded in data practices and systems in our various fields. And just to give us some examples here, at the data collection phase, Dr. Jones has shared how the struggle to bring in African-American patients for liver cancer treatments leads to a lack of representation of that patient community in research data sets, resulting in less effective treatments. This in turn ebbs away at the trust that the patients have in the medical care system, which subsequently affects their likelihood to seek early treatment or treatment at all. Another example, which comes from Amazon, the e-commerce giant, which has implications across industries. In the data analysis phase, often issues arise with big data analytics when an algorithm cannot account for bias. This was the case with Amazon's hiring algorithm, which taught itself that male job candidates were preferable to female candidates. And then lastly, in data story after data story, we tend to forego the explicit critical questions of data and data displays that are needed, including whose perspectives and experiences are reflected in the data, whose are not, and why that might be. Rather, traditional ways of displaying data try to conceal the context of data production and dehumanize data in ways that not only limit our emotional responses, but also restrict how we might utilize the data for change. So for instance, as an example here, this was reported by Maralta et al. In 2021, a recent New York Times data visualization that could be used to influence decision-making for easing COVID-19 lockdowns depicted business establishments on two constructed measures, activity indoors and levels of contact. And this data viz assumed a false equivalence among categories of businesses in terms of their significance for wellness, such as by placing self-storage units on par with community spaces like museums, and also equated a low frequency of human touch with wellness, again, not taking into account lived experiences and perspectives. And so collectively, these examples just illustrate that the challenges to countering bias and ultimately transforming data and data practices are complex. And likewise, the solutions will be multifaceted. So some needed actions like diversifying the STEM pipeline to change data science fields, which tend to be dominated by white men, can take many years. Consequently, we see an opportunity with our project right now to have more immediate impact on the emerging and current data professionals. And so our research questions are as follows. How does the training, our project's training, develop participants' knowledge of discriminatory bias and inclusion in the data lifecycle? And how does this intervention change their data practices? So our intervention is a 3-hour synchronous training module. The design follows a train the trainer model. So initial participants will be asked to conduct subsequent sessions with our support in their respective communities or labs. The goals of this module are threefold. Broadly speaking, we hope that participants will develop an understanding of the data lifecycle and its relevance to everyday professional life, develop an understanding of discriminatory biases in the data lifecycle, and also an understanding of how to advocate for inclusion in the data lifecycle. This will be done by walking attendees through parts of the data lifecycle, providing questions for reflection and opportunities for application of workshop tools. And the content for the module builds on our professional experience in respective data contexts, as well as other recent efforts and frameworks to raise awareness and counter discriminatory bias in data science, including Data for Black Lives, data feminism, and other work on implicit bias. Our initial participant audience are graduate and advanced undergraduate students at UM in educational, psychological, and health fields. This training will also include community members and stakeholders so that they can become ambassadors for the program in their respective professional networks. And our research methods for the project are primarily evaluative. We will collect video and audio records from session recordings, conduct follow-up interviews with participants, and disseminate self-efficacy surveys that will both examine how confident participants feel that they could advocate for change to promote inclusion in their context, and measure their confidence in the development of specific knowledge domains. At the moment, we are currently converting our content into an instructional digital delivery platform. And we tend to conduct the pilot training sometime this summer, with the subsequent trainings led by initial participants in the fall. The future enactments led by these initial participants will be tailored for their specific contexts and audiences. And just kind of a side note here is that really our ultimate goal with this effort is to broaden community stakeholder participation in public health data science practices. We think, and by public health, we think of it as inclusive of community and psychological well-being as well as education. And finally, looking ahead in fall 2021 and beyond, we expect to scale the training and its uses by translating the content into other instructional mediums, including a website, a book, and continued scholarship. So these efforts will be aimed at students in data science, computer science, and quantitative statistics classes, as well as in community-facing public health programs and then also targeted towards non-academic community members. In particular, our team members teach classes in these areas at UM, so we know the need for these kinds of resources. And we will also seek additional funding opportunities to support these next steps as well. And that's all I have for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. Fantastic. And everybody's staying on time. This is awesome. Let's move on to the next presentation. So I have 3L from the law school, Tim Loftus, with us. His team, their title is COVID-19, Evaluating Fault Lines in the Health of Our Communities and Developing Community-Centered Solutions. Tim, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Share screen here really quickly. All right. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Timothy Loftus, and I am a fellow in 3L in the Center for Ethics and Public Service at the School of Law. It's if I have a little glow today, it's also my last day of law school. Our team, the two PIs on this are Professor Alfieri and Dr. Shafazan from the School of Law and Medicine, respectively. Abe Parrish from the Richter Library, bringing his ArcGIS skills to bear. Alejandro Antonio is biostats, and then Lauren Madigan kind of running the ship. And then we're joined by a great group of students. Dr. Obe is a doctor from Nigeria who's our research assistant, and then 4 wonderful MD and PhD students and 4 awesome law students. A little bit about the West Grove history, our target group and our community partners. In the 1880s, these were, largely Bahamian settlers. Actually enjoyed a decent life then. Came for work, interacted with whites, which was rare in the South at the time, and things were good. And then in the 1920s, the city of Miami annexed the Grove, and segregation ensued. And today, 100 years later, pretty dramatic effects of Jim Crow remain. Our 3 community partners, there's the Coconut Grove Ministerial Alliance, there's Grove Rights and Community Equity, Inc., and also known as GRACE, and then the St. Paul CDC. So this project began with COVID-19's early impact in March of 2020. You had the stay-at-home orders, which really for this community in particular, not only were they, many of them not working, but their kids were out of school, and so childcare issues, and there's a pretty dramatic impact for them. There's also no testing available, and that was a big problem for them. And so I've got shortage there in quotes. It was really non-existent. And so they reached out to the Center of Ethics and Public Service, in particular, Professor Alfieri, and asked, is there anything you can do to help us? So the question, where do we begin? We clearly know there are going to be disparities. And at first glance, just looking at data from the Department of Health, Florida Department of Health, and the EPA, you compare the West Grove census tract to the one literally across US 1, in Coral Gables, and you just start to see these dramatic disparities kind of down the list. And just, for examples, diabetes and cancer deaths, the respiratory hazards, and so forth, so on. And just quickly the geography here. So this is just up the road from our campus down here, these two census tracts right across from US1. So we designed a community health assessment to comprehensively kind of take a holistic, big picture view of this community's health. We put together what amounts to a series of validated questionnaires on everything from the basic general health questions to housing security, financial security, and then as we'll get to in a second, mental health targeted surveys as well. The reception has been warm. I mean, the community wanted this. We have had some challenges, and I'll talk about those in just a second. But one of the big things that we wanted to do is make sure that even though the community is not formally on this grant, and that they had ownership of this and that they drove our work. And so a big part of that has been keeping our relationships healthy with the community and working alongside them, not just seeking their input here and there. Remaining incredibly transparent and kind of informing them of every step that we are about to take or going to take. And importantly, this is a term from Professor Alfieri, but showing up. And so you see there, Reverend Robinson, Nathaniel Robinson, the pastor of St. Paul AME. And so we have had some challenges arise. In particular, just how we frame certain questions in the survey. Again, we reviewed it several times with our community partners. Some significant mistrust compounded by misinformation. And so I don't know if anyone saw the headline last fall where you had Black newborns 3 times more likely when cared for by white doctor. What you may not know about that headline is it was Florida data. So I think the study came from Harvard, but that was Florida data used. The other thing was, we filled out these forms before, we've done this before, why do we need another study? And so bringing the community along with us for why this is important. And there was even a controversy over one of our proposals titles. I won't go into it, but just sensitivity around the way certain things sound and appear to the community. Tried to ask questions, but then take more of a listening role and again let them drive this project. So one of the things we heard right off the bat, kind of alluded to it earlier, but that mental health is just suffering now more than ever. We've sort of seen this more and more data on this as the pandemic has gone on. But this is related to their physical health, their employment, their housing, resource disruption, the George Floyd aftermath of last summer and the disruption there. And one of the things they really said was just a huge issue for them was childcare with the kids out of school. So we're in the process of deploying our survey. Our students are doing a fantastic job on the MD-MPH side of running that, and we're getting good feedback. And then on the law side, the legal research, again, 4 great 1L law students joined us this spring semester, taking a look at the various rights and responsibilities of the actors that are responsible for providing healthcare to this community, and paying attention to what the legal landscape is around these issues. And they've turned out a great piece of a great research memo that is just beyond what I think anybody expected from our end, and made some significant progress on what they'd like to do around social determinants of health data collection, and they have a whole kind of project laid out, an initiative, and luckily those students are going to stick around for the summer and fall and work on that with us. And just really quickly wrapping up, where do we hope we go from here? Future directions. So targeted interventions from the medical side, additional interdisciplinary collaborations. We hope to have course development in both the law and the medical school, and hopefully requests from the teams on both sides, the students, the younger students, teamwork between the JD and MD MPH students. And that's it. And that's my puppy. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Congrats on your last day of law school. It's really exciting. Next up, we have doctoral student Zinzi Bailey, Professor Robin Bakken, presenting on their project, Early Childhood System Integration to Promote Community Resilience and Equity for Children of Color.
Thanks so much, Ali, and thank you to Ali and Aaron for their support of these ULink initiatives around racial and social equity. I'm Robin Bakken. I'm the Assistant Provost for Civic and Community Engagement here at UM and Associate Professor in the Department of History. I'll be presenting with Zinzi Bailey, a PhD student in the Department of Psychology. So this next slide shows our ULink team. So you can see the variety of disciplines represented. We have child psychology, geography, public health, pediatrics, history, and civic and community engagement. And this initiative started as part of a phase 1 ULink grant, where all of us were brought together to explore big data and geographic patterns of both risks and resources influencing children's well-being across Miami-Dade County. So our initial findings pointed us toward exploring neighborhoods of resilience. So that is where children were experiencing elevated risks to their development and well-being, and yet they demonstrated developmental strengths in outcomes. So for this current ULink grant, we chose to focus on 3 targeted areas in collaboration with community partners and to take a deeper dive both qualitatively and quantitatively to better understand community perspectives on the assets that help support resilience, especially for children of color. So this next slide shows our community partners. So we are working with organizations in Overtown, in Little Haiti, and Little Havana. And these partners represent neighborhoods where we have identified these areas of resilience in communities of color, where there have also been historic patterns of both segregation and disinvestment in neighborhood infrastructure, healthcare, education, et cetera. We also have longstanding relationships with these community partners, and they've been made more robust through an annual symposium called the Synergy Symposium, which is a public event co-sponsored by the Children's Trust and Concerned African American Women, where we've engaged community organizations and agencies invested in the well-being of children to share findings and also obtain feedback and dialogue that can be used for greater collective impact. So our next slide shows the motivation for this project. We know that Black children are disproportionately living in communities affected by historical patterns of racism and disinvestment, that children's well-being is dependent on the resources both in their homes, in their communities, as well as in their school settings, and that children of color have less access to many of these important resources, particularly during early childhood. So our goals include applying a racial and social equity framework for growing more equitable relationships across systems for early child development, validating community knowledge of children, and strengthening the capacity of local agencies to identify and access the resources needed to support children. So this next image, right, is a familiar one to many of us who are engaged in interdisciplinary research. But what we find in particular about early childhood research is that there are so many agencies and institutions that work with children, but many of them are often siloed. So this next slide shows really what our goal is in terms of thinking about the fact that child well-being is multidimensional, that children develop in dynamic interaction with multiple systems, and that no one system or one solution can help address the overall holistic approach to child well-being. So understanding that our data is siloed, our disciplines are siloed, led us to really try to look for opportunities to collaborate and bring together disciplines and also build on the strengths of communities. So both providing data for community-based organizations, but also understanding their on-the-ground perspective for what kinds of resources are most impactful. So we use an asset-based approach to community participatory research and apply a racial and social equity lens to explore kind of our big defining question: what would an integrated early childhood data system that enabled Black children to achieve early education success actually look like in practice? And our specific activities include co-constructing a study of community perspectives on resilience for children, a countywide racial equity analysis of the Resilience Index, a qualitative study where agencies help identify community members invested in the well-being of children. And in acknowledgement of the presentation that Jennifer Kahn gave a few moments ago, we're also really cognizant about the way data has been biased. And so this is one of the published data tools that we're looking at in terms of evaluating an integrated data system through a racial equity lens to ensure that individual communities that are contributing data have a voice in the data that's integrated, and also how it's used and interpreted. So now I'm going to turn it over to John L. Bailey, who will discuss some of our initial data analysis and findings related to neighborhood and child resilience.
Great. So as Dr. Backen said, today I'm going to be sharing some of our preliminary findings with all of you. I'm going to start by sharing the community level data that we've been mapping, and then share a descriptive picture of individual children across the county. So displayed here, I have a map that we created looking at neighborhood risk, and it's based on the Bruner Child Raising Vulnerability Index, or the NRI. The NRI is an index of social, educational, and economic indicators that are known to be related to children's well-being. And we use those 10 indicators here and the census tracts from the American Community Survey, and created an index for every census tract, and then we mapped them here. So you can see that the vulnerability index ranges from 0 to 10, and the areas that are darker on the map are neighborhoods where there are higher risk, and then the lighter areas are where there are fewer or none of these risks. You can also see that throughout the county, there are some areas where there are concentrated areas of risk. Now, this is just to give you a descriptive idea about the number of risks that children in Miami-Dade County are experiencing on average. Children who are under 4 in the county are most likely to be experiencing risks in their neighborhood, and less than half of children are experiencing no risks, but 28% of children under 4 are living in a census tract with 3 or more risks, and 56% of children live in a census tract with at least 1 or 2 risks. And these numbers are greater than the national average, and they're also greater than older children and adults living in the county. So Miami-Dade County Public Schools Department of Early Childhood and the Children's Trust collaborated and administered the Early Child Development Instrument, or the EDI, which is a measure of children's developmental skills, and it measures these 5 areas of development listed here. And so children are rated by their kindergarten teachers in the spring for the EDI, and we then aggregated the scores at the census tract level. This is the overall countywide averages for children. And so the overall pattern is showing that children are generally on track, with a similar percentage of children falling in the vulnerable or at-risk categories across all 5 domains. One of the questions we were really interested in understanding was, how does neighborhood risk relate to children's developmental vulnerabilities and strengths? And our preliminary analysis shows that on average, as the number of neighborhood risks increases, the number of children on track decreases. So then we decided that we wanted to look at how neighborhood risk and children's developmental vulnerabilities were overlaid on a map with each other. And so we created this resilience index. Here you can see that the blue areas are areas where children are experiencing many neighborhood risks, but they are experiencing few developmental vulnerabilities. Red is where children are experiencing few or no neighborhood risks and having high developmental vulnerability. And gray is where children are experiencing how you would expect them to be performing on the EDI, given the number of neighborhood risks they're living in. In this map, you can see we've highlighted the communities that we're working with our partners. And you can see that there are within each community ranging from red, gray, and blue. And so we're really interested in understanding the assets that can be leveraged within each community to support ethnic minority children. So for a zoomed in picture of one of the communities we were looking at, this is Little Havana. This is where children are experiencing a high number of risks, but few developmental vulnerabilities. I'm going to start speeding through. So this is Little Havana again, and this is just showing early childhood programs. And this is just showing the accredited programs that we have, and then that there are a higher percentage of accredited programs rather than unaccredited programs. And so one of the things I really want to share is the descriptive picture of children across the EDI. So we have that females are scoring higher than males, children learning English as a second language are scoring lower than those who are not. But one of the more striking things is that while Black children are living in neighborhoods with higher numbers of vulnerabilities than expected, they're also living in fewer blue neighborhoods, so the more resilient neighborhoods. And we're really interested in understanding other community assets that can be leveraged to understand this. So I'm going to trade it back to Dr. Backin.
Okay, and actually, Janelle, you can just stay on that last slide and I'll just sum up by saying, basically our work is now focusing on how can we begin to center racial equity in our data integration, and how can mapping have the most impact on our community where neighborhoods and community-based organizations understand risk and resilience, and what kinds of effective strategies can we use to link research with practice in raising the resilience aspects of members of our communities of color. So thank you all so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Janelle. That was awesome. Let's move on to the next team. We have Professor John Murphy, who's going to be talking about his project, Community-Based Budgeting as an Antidote to Police Violence. And I think Eva's going to share her slides, your slides for you.
Yes, hello. My name, are we ready? Okay, yeah, my name's John Murphy. I'm in the Department of Sociology. My team consists of two people from the business school, and that's Francisco Delgado and Miguel Minuti Meza, and somebody from the School of Education, and that's Scott Evans. We're working with a community partner known as Urban Greenworks, and particularly, we're working with a person named Roger Horn. This has been a wonderful relationship. Without this, this project would have never moved along. This is a community-based project devoted to participatory budgeting. Okay, the idea here is that we're actually training local people in this budgeting process, so that they then can participate in the city and county budgeting process in a more equitable manner. Okay, so in a sense, we're working with a community partner who we were able to get us in contact with various people, and we're trying through this process to develop what some people call sort of a moral economy. I mean, the idea here is once you get involved in this process, you realize that budgeting has a lot more to do with a lot of other facets of social life other than money. And so this is what we're going to talk about here in a minute. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the big issue is here, okay, what is participatory budgeting? I'll try to, so I'm stay within the 10 minutes. I'll try to keep my commentary to a minimum. Here are the ideas. Since participatory budgeting is where community members meet regularly, and I know you guys can all read this, discuss the needs for funds, develop and debate solutions, propose budgets to fund these solutions, and offer alternatives. The idea here is that the traditional budgeting process has not been very transparent at all. And the whole idea here is to train people so they can engage this process, and that to open this budgeting process up so that the people, local communities can actually engage this process to get funds so that they can fund projects in their neighborhoods. So in a sense, this is in a sense an attempt to train people to get the money that they should be getting, but they're not, because the way the budgeting process traditionally is understood. Okay, next slide, please. The research sort of shows that participatory budgeting has a lot of positive outcomes. And these are some of them. People learn about budgeting. There's a shift in budget priorities. People develop a sense of community. There's expanded participation. There's a sense of control over the process and so forth, okay? The idea here is that basically participatory budgeting deals not only with money, but has a lot to do with the development of civic life, okay? And so this is something that we're really sort of learning as we're going along here in this process, and what people are telling us about what how they've benefited and so forth. Now, and I'll tell you in a minute what we've done so far, but this is just laying the sort of the background for this. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a community-based initiative, okay? I mean, there's basically two principles related to sort of community-based projects. One is that local knowledge matters, and the second is that local people should control these projects. And so this is what, in a sense, this is a way to really make sure that projects truly begin to reflect what, in a sense, what communities really need and want. Writers call this sort of authentic participation. This is derived from a Latin American sociologist called Orlando Falls Borda. And he says this is, in a sense, community projects have to meet these two standards, and this causes some problems, which we can talk about if you want to ask me some questions later about carrying some of these things out. Okay, next slide, please. So authentic participation, again, the research sort of shows that these are some of the outcomes related to authentic participation. And authentic participation goes beyond simply consultations and partnerships. And we hear this language all the time. A lot of times those type of relationships really don't involve communities in terms of them having control, or oftentimes local knowledge directing these projects. So in a sense, authentic participation leads to some of these outcomes. Community members get direct control over a project. There's relevant community input, skill and confidence building happen. There's project sustainability, but in the end, really, the idea here is that communities are supposed to gain a sense of autonomy. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. Okay, next slide. Here are the key facets of our project, okay? We developed a curriculum in concert with the people that we're training. This whole thing started with a series of focus groups and things, so forth, to get input into the whole process of sort of developing the curriculum. You can go online and you can find what we call like toolkits related to participatory budgeting. And those usually just supply you maybe with a little bit of knowledge to maybe do an hour or 2 hour workshop or something. And what we've discovered in our project here is that type of approach just doesn't work. I mean, we've had 6 training sessions already, and people are beginning to just sort of come together as a group, gain the confidence we thought would happen and so forth. So we see our project is advancing beyond what's going on typically. We're training a cohort of local persons. We're using a trainer's model. The idea is that these people will be going and training others. And in our phase of our project right now, the issue we're facing of how to institutionalize this in a community. And so this is what we're working on now. And this has become an issue with our collaboration with the university also. And we can talk about that problem too. I mean, that's a huge issue the university is going to have to confront if they're going to do community-based projects. We're also developing a community accessible web page. We were going to try to go through UM, but we didn't want to use a UM web page. We wanted to use a web page that was already activated sort of in the community, and we would build on that. And we're really using Urban Greenworks. And this web page is going to be used as a means of organizing and training and teaching, and an organizational tool, because a part of this is not just learning about budgets, but it's also we're also trying to develop this idea of people being community organizers also, and that's key to this whole thing. We've identified and we're going to disseminate a body of literature on community-based budgeting. We've already accumulated, I don't know, 55, 60, 70 pages of references. In itself, this is going to be an interesting thing. We're consolidating this information, which now is all over the place, and we're going to make this available to communities and others. And the last thing we're doing is we're actually going to produce a training guide, a manual, that we're in the midst of writing. This is what's going on, to have this available for communities who want to engage in community-based projects. Okay, next slide, please. This is what our curriculum looks like. These are the areas that we're training people in. And so in a sense, we have six modules, okay? The first one was talking about the nature of a community-based project. Every project I've been in, this is where we start these type of things so people understand what a community-based project is and build this community-based philosophy into the project. Then the next module, these were all 2-hour modules. We met on Sunday afternoons from 4 to 6 every other week. And it was online, and this is another tough thing for a community-based project. If I could walk into a community center or a church basement or something like this where I'd usually be working, it'd be very, very different dynamic, okay? And so this has been a struggle in itself. The second was talking about the key facets of participatory budgeting, okay? The third, and this is where these guys, two of the guys I told you were from the business school, and this was a huge thing. At first, I didn't know how this was going to work, but these guys really, and the people in the community really liked this information when they were talking about actual budgets. So we met with the city of Miami, we met with the county budget directors. We've got a lot of input from these people, and we're working with them now in ways to get the trainees to be able to make proposals to these various groups, either the city of Miami or the county, to maybe get some input, get some money back for their project. So this is what we're trying to do. And the neighbors really like this because for the first time, I think a lot of people saw budgets, and they never saw this before. They never saw where the money was coming from. They never saw where it was going and how these budget process. Once you learned about the budget calendar, for instance, it's a term I learned, of course. Once you learn about the budget calendar, you know where intervention can happen. Oh, I got to stop. Okay, so I violated my own rule. I was going too long. Okay, so anyway, the last thing I'll say is this is what we've done so far. Can you just go to the last slide? Oh, you can't. It's over. All right.
No, you can give us your closing remarks, John, and then we'll touch base with you during Q&A.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, man. I can't believe I violated my own rules. Okay? So in a sense, what we've done so far, the curriculum is in operation, is being refined. The trainees are coming together as a group. The trainees right now are formulating budget proposals to make to these groups. The trainees are going to make a presentation to either the county or the city, depending on where they live. We've accumulated this literature. A website is being developed, and the handbook is being written. So that's what we've done.
Awesome. Thanks, John. We appreciate it. All right, next presentation. We have Professor Nick Peterson speaking about his team's work, facial profiling, defendant physical characteristics, machine learning analytics, and criminal justice disparities in Miami-Dade County.
Okay, can you all see the slideshow here? Perfect. Okay. So as Ali said,
we can see right now. Do you want a News at the U article?
Well, no. Can you see the slideshow?
You want your slideshow? No. So I would get out of screen share and then make sure you're in make sure you have PowerPoint open and then hit.
Can you see it now?
Yes, you got it.
Okay, sorry about that. So as Ali was saying, this is a project focusing on machine learning and criminal justice in Miami-Dade County. It's a project involving myself from sociology, Tamar Labe from law, Ubo Visser from computer science, a graduate student from computer science for Old DOS, and then Marissa Omori, who used to be in the sociology department, at Miami, but is now at University of Missouri at St. Louis. So just wanted to give you a little bit of backdrop in terms of kind of why we're studying this issue, why we think it's important. Unless you've been living under a rock recently, you probably heard about a lot of the sort of controversies and developments about facial recognition technologies and how they're being used and sometimes misused. And there's a lot of concern about potential abuses, not only privacy concerns, but racial profiling, et cetera. And this has led even some cities or states to try to ban the use of facial recognition technologies, and especially in the police context, right? So there's a lot of concern about how this is going to affect policing moving forward, because the reality is that these technologies are not going anywhere. So we have to sort of learn how to deal with this. There's also been some cases, some high-profile cases of wrongful arrests that have been made based on false identification from a facial recognition software. So basically, they put images in the database. They thought they came up with an accurate match, but turned out it wasn't. So here's just one example from a teenager from New York City who was wrongfully arrested for shoplifting at an Apple iPhone store. And then, just sort of generally, it can lead to a lot of other problems. I'm not going to go through, it's kind of a detailed slide here, so I don't have time to go through everything. But basically, the idea is that, if you have facial recognition technology that leads to misidentification, that can lead to the wrongful arrest of somebody, which in the course of that arrest, they might also find other drugs, other weapons. They might find that this person has a warrant. And so it can trigger all these other things, not to mention just in terms of if they're wrongfully arrested and being pretrial detained, they might lose their job, they might lose their house, it impacts their family. So it could have huge ripple effects in terms of policing and the consequences for criminal justice. And so these different concerns about facial profiling are kind of put up against the backdrop of some previous research that I had done with Marissa Mori and some others on criminal justice racial disparities in Miami-Dade County. And so one of the things that we find is that there's huge racial disparities in terms of sort of the county population relative to different criminal justice outcomes. So for example, here we have the incarceration rate compared to the county and the populations for these 4 different groups. And you can see here that there's huge disparities in terms of Black people being incarcerated in the county. So they're disproportionately incarcerated versus, on the other hand, whites, and especially white Hispanics, compared to their share of the county population, are vastly underrepresented. And so this got us thinking, okay, well, maybe these facial recognition technologies might be contributing to some of these disparities, and how and sort of thinking in the future of how, when these technologies are unveiled and used more frequently, how might they further amplify these different disparities that we're currently already seeing. So our 4 overarching research questions were: how do humans, computers, and the law see race or ethnicity? And how does the way we see race or ethnicity shape these different criminal justice outcomes? And can machine learning, or what I'll call ML, race ethnicity classifications, enhance our understanding of the role that physical features, including things like skin tone, other facial features, play in terms of exacerbating these disparities? And then the 4th question is just sort of a broader question of how do these technologies, if at all, exacerbate existing inequalities in the system? So to look at this issue, we looked at data that we had from over 200,000 mugshots for defendants adult defendants arrested in Miami-Dade County. And we also took a sample of those and had them rated by humans via survey, which I'm not going to talk about too much today, but if people have questions about that, I can talk about that. And then we also, obviously a big part of the project is computer science as well. So we kind of modified 42 different machine learning models to classify arrestees based on their race in the official record, as well as some other facial features, skin tone, et cetera. And so we used a number of different models. Here are just some examples, AlexNet, Inception 4. Again, we used a lot of different models. We ran 40 different models and adjusting the parameters. So it was a pretty big undertaking in terms of trying to modify those machine learning facial processing technologies. And then finally, we wanted to look at how these machine learning classifications for race could be used to predict these different criminal justice outcomes. So let me show you some of the preliminary findings that we have. So as I said, we did 42 models. So that becomes a little overwhelming to kind of talk about each individual one. So I just picked two models that I think are sort of emblematic of the points that I'm trying to make here. The first is that there's large disparities based on official race. And so by official race, I mean what was recorded in the court records based on the arrest file if somebody was Black or white. So we see that here. So here, the blue bars corresponding to those who are identified in the official record as white, and then in orange, those who are Black. And we see big disparities in terms of the model accuracy. So this is basically comparing what's in the official record versus what the machine learning facial recognition software predicts based on viewing the image. And I'll show an example in a minute where they kind of narrow in on specific points of the face. They take into consideration a lot of different factors. And so it's basically comparing how accurate the label that the machine learning pipeline comes up with compares to the official record. So there we see big disparities. The other thing that's interesting here is that some models just really perform terribly, right? So Inception 4, for example, is really, really bad at predicting or sort of matching the classifications for the official race data. Versus some other ones that really are much more accurate in terms of the correspondence between the official records. And so that's something that we wanted to sort of delve into a little bit more. So we used one way to sort of do that was to look at these heat maps. So we blurred, when these images go into the facial recognition software, they're clean images, but obviously to protect the person's identity, we've blurred them here. And so here's just some examples of kind of ways that the machine learning models focus on different aspects of the face to try to make these classifications. So for example, this one here, you could see it's sort of focused on the core kind of center part of the face, and for whatever reason picked that up. And as a result, it predicted white with 100% probability. It basically said, we're certain this person is white in the official record. Versus this person, it was a little less sure about. They had a probability of being white according to the machine learning model of 0.7. So still pretty high, but not as high. And you can see here, maybe part of that is because it was focusing on kind of extraneous parts of the face here. It's looking at the hair or the forehead, maybe some facial hair here. So it's interesting to see sort of what the models pick up on. Here are some examples of these heat maps for defendants who are labeled as Black in the official record. And you can see that this individual, she was denoted by the model as having basically 100% probability of being Black in the official record. Versus this person, this was a interesting case where they are actually given 100% probability of being white. And you know, looking at the official record, that's not the case, as well as the ratings that the human raters perceive this person not to be white here. So part of that could be maybe it's picking up on, you know, it's not really even looking at the face here. So the heat maps show that it's looking at sort of extraneous factors, and maybe that's contributing to it. And so we're really trying to to understand basically what sort of factors are these models considering when they make these determinations of race. Kind of like the data science group was saying. I thought they did a good job of kind of talking about how some of these things in machine learning, et cetera, are kind of a black box, right? We throw something in there, we get an answer, but we don't really know how or why it happens, right? And so we're trying to kind of look under the hood, so to speak, to figure out what's going on here and sort of how do these machines think about race or ethnicity. The next
Nick,
section,
we're at 10 minutes, Nick. So if you could close up at a comfortable point for you, that'd be awesome.
Okay, sure, yeah. So then we looked at the predictions, and we find that if you use the machine learning predictions, they exaggerate, underestimate racial disparity. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Nick. For our last presentation, and I apologize for interrupting, but for the sake of moving on, we have Sanjeev Chatterjee, who will be presenting on his project, Racism in America, Conversations Beyond Black and White. Sanjeev, do we have you? Yes, awesome, thank you. Let's see, Sanjeev, is your microphone on? Eva, do we have Sanjeev highlighted? Let's see.
I think he's muted. I'm working on highlighting him.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh, beautiful, we hear you.
You hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
Good.
Sanjeev.
I just said that, wow, that's a really tough act to follow, coming at the end of it. I just want to point out that this project is very much an exploratory project, and B, that the team thinks of itself as, I can't move the slide forward either. All kinds of technical difficulty, I don't know why. I can't, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but you're having trouble advancing your slides, it sounds like.
And also I can't get out of it.
Okay. Let's try the escape button. That's usually.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I'm just now, and then it won't let me advance it. So I'm going to stop the share for a second.
Yep, try again.
Back to it. Maybe it's too large. Do you see it still?
We just see you.
Okay, good. Let's see. Let me come into it one more time if I can. Sorry. Let me just do it like this. Then.
Sounds good.
You can see the whole slide, right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So we basically, this is the team. John Bayer from the Department of Public Health Sciences at the Miller School, Jasvinder Bolina, who's a writer and a poet from the Department of English, myself, Sanjeev Chatterjee, a professor in the School of Cinema, School of Communication, Dr. Shumita Chatterjee, who is a lecturer in the Department of History and Gender and Sexuality Studies, and Imelda Moyes, assistant professor in the Department of Geography, and Jose Shapaznik, Department of Public Health Sciences, and our wonderful graduate assistant, Fernanda De Silva. This whole topic, started quite organically. Even my niece called us for some advice, me and Shumita, who about some advice about family dispute that was going on in Arizona, family of Indian origin. The son would not talk to the parents because he thought his parents were overly racist. So then basically Shumita put up this am I racist intergenerational conversation between South Asian Americans as a webinar, which was attended by a fair number of people, probably about 50 people. And that set us thinking that, we think of racism, maybe in our heads, we are always thinking of it as a black and white issue, and that maybe we should explore it a little bit further. And that was really the origin of this idea for this project. So here are the questions that we came up with. What are the perceptions about Black lives in America for non-European immigrants, and where do these perceptions come from? What are the perceptions about Black lives in America for youth of non-European immigrants and children, essentially, and where do these perceptions come from? How are intra-family and intra-community relationships affected by generational differences? How are ideas regarding systemic nature of racism as a public health crisis, for example, understood by recent, since 1965, non-European immigrants as compared to citizen by birth children? What alliances are emerging among the first generation of American citizens by birth and African Americans, if any? So these were the questions that we moved forward with. And the reason I say that we actually, as the research team, are really looking at ourselves as students is that we are working through a youth board that we have recruited. So we haven't really started work over the last many months. We've basically gone into communities and tried to recruit the best young people who have strong community ties to become part of the youth board that is the driving force for this first phase of the study. And our ideas, we have ideas about what the outputs are going to be, but it's still flexible, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So we sent out this flyer, and the project obviously, has IRB, I won't say clearance, it was given an exception saying that it is exempt, but it took some time to get this done. And then now we are at a stage where we have this fairly diverse group of 5. There are 2 more members that are being vetted, but these are final members, as you can see, one of Haitian origin, one from Colombia, one from Pakistan, and one adopted from China. And the 2 that we are waiting on, one is African American from Overtown, and the second one is also a Latina. All members are, of course, reading. So you want to talk about race? That's a prerequisite for the project. And in terms of method, we are starting what we are calling training sessions, but we are really trying to create a co-creation model for the training session. So what will emerge from that in the first instance is going to be an instruction manual for conducting community and family conversations that actually is co-created with the board members and tested out and responded to. So over the summer, the work is kind of planned as an iterative model where the youth board members, we plan something, they go out, they do the interviews, they come back, we discuss that, we tweak it as necessary, and we move forward. The conversations are going to start in families and then spread into communities over the summer. We have decided that the option of recording is going to be flexible. It could be notes, it can be audio recordings, it can be video recordings, depending on the level of comfort, either upfront or as maybe trust grows in the project or doesn't. We don't know where this will go. Our outcomes, our outputs at this point, we think of the workshop will probably start with generating some poetry, essays, etc. We certainly do plan a podcast, but that's probably at a latest stage. And short films, we will probably end up with some short films. That is our hope, that people will agree to be videotaped in the process, and the training certainly includes that. From a scholarly point of view, article chapters, contextualizing, analyzing the collected materials. This will happen after the summer. So we plan to start working on scholarly outputs after the summer. And the manual conducting family and community conversations will kind of come out of the workshop. This is the timeline. Recruitment is finished. We are just waiting for clearance on the 2 names from IRB. May the research sprints we are doing the Richter Library research sprints with the board members. So they have a good sense of the methodology of how we are going to go ahead and also how we're going to manage the project. So they'll learn from that, hopefully something. And then the youth board training, as I said, will be a co-creation exercise. And all of June will be intense in terms of community engagement. And then summer and then fall will be material editing and data analysis at that stage. Evaluation will basically follow the questions that we are asking and see what outcomes came for these questions. And afterwards, really get into a mode of getting funding to expand the scope of the project, maybe create a book project. And I certainly am very interested as a documentary filmmaker to make a documentary film in the long run. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you to the teams. So excited about this work. Really excited now to introduce our discussant for this event, Dr. Zinzi Bailey. Zinzi is a research assistant professor in the Division of Medical Oncology at Sylvester at the Miller School of Medicine. To say she's a leading voice at the forefront of the national conversation about structural racism and medicine's role in it would be an understatement. Check out a News at the U article about her recently, just really, really cool work. In December, she was the lead author of a really cool commentary in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a huge deal, outlining the major implications of structural racism that influence health for minority populations. She has a pretty incredible academic pedigree as well. We're so excited to have her here to speak, but also to have her at the university is just a real gift, and we're really happy to have you here. Zinzi, take it away.
Thanks so much, Ali. You are way too nice. I've structured my comments in a range of different ways. So hopefully you can bear with me and see the method to my madness, right? We're focused on race and research at the U, right? And centered around this one book, one U concept that we have pushed forward. And I think it's a great direction that we're moving in having this book be the one book that we use, right? And so Ijeoma Oluo really put this book together as a way to allow people to have better and more effective conversations about race and help readers understand systems of racism in America. And furthermore, offer some guidance, some level of guidance on how to have conversations and discussions about privilege and white supremacy with others, right? We can't just keep those conversations within a family or within a certain group of people. We have to have these conversations in broader settings in order to effect change, right? And so I'm going to start out with just like contextualizing what we're talking about. And so I want to clearly define that race is a social construct. And so what do I really mean by that? And what do other people mean by that? And I would say that through a process of racialization, so different social mechanisms, political mechanisms, economic mechanisms across time, it creates distinctions between races and drives the importance of phenotypic or genetic factors. And that is driven by cultural, historical, ideological, geographical, and legal influences. So that racialization produces racial categories that are inherently hierarchical relative to one another. That means race derives meaning through the differentiation of groups, not from a precise measurement of any kind of characteristic associated with the group. And to be located high on a racial hierarchy confers unearned advantages and privileges by being a part of that system, while being low on a racial hierarchy confers unearned disadvantages and penalties. One example of this kind of relativeness is the placement of environmental hazards, which disproportionately are located in communities of color. So if such a hazard is located in a community of color, it is by definition not located in a white community, right? And so through no efforts of their own, children of color living in close proximity to the hazard will experience higher health risks that are directly tied to risk avoidance for white children living distally from the hazard. So being able to talk about that relational nature is important, right? And that can get us into conversations that get difficult, right? And it's important to practice having that conversation because this kind of racialization, and I would say this is an example of environmental racism tied to climate justice project, perhaps, maybe. This is normative, this is normal, this is happening every day. It's not something out of the norm, it is happening every single day, right? And so race operates as a marker of specific levels or processes of racialization in a society, and then becomes more salient because of some society-specific, time-specific racialization. So, Jim Crow, redlining is impacting housing quality, housing availability, et cetera, which applies to a range of groups that have been racialized over time, right? And so that speaks to some of the kind of heterogeneity and not having the story be just a black and white story, right? But it requires understanding that level of racialization. And again, that shortcut to explaining some of those processes of racialization is to simply say that a race is a social construct. And from there, I'm actually less interested in, or find it less interesting to try to change sick individuals, for example. So as a social epidemiologist, I'm focused on public health. Excuse me. I'm less interested in changing sick individuals, right? And more interested in changing sick societies and environments, sick systems, which act as root causes. And those root causes, these discriminatory social conditions, are necessarily mutable and not innate, right? So you want to talk about race. I would say that what we're really talking about are dimensions of racism, a central organizing element of the United States and other race-conscious societies. And racism is not an event, it is a process. It's things that are happening over time, accumulating, et cetera. And sociologist and sometimes social epidemiologist, David Williams, states racism is, it's an organized system in which the dominant racial group, based on an ideology of inferiority, categorizes and ranks people into social groups called races and uses its power to devalue, disempower, and differentially allocate valued societal resources and opportunities to groups defined as inferior. So with that, racism is not a collection of isolated acts that are bundled together. It is an organized system. And so with that in mind, much of what this book, So You Want to Talk About Race, there are very key ideas that are pulling from this key concept of racism as an organized system. One of the first key ideas is that racism is a result of systems that favor certain groups over others, and then those systems then is reinforced by those same systems. And a lot of that would be covered by a lot of what I talk about with regard to structural racism, that there's something systemic at play, where it's not the label of racism or racist that is key, is that we know that these systems are racist, so we can act in a manner or in actions that are racist or anti-racist, which would mean acting to perpetuate inequities or to break them down. And in this, lack of action is action, right? And so these systems are varied and all-encompassing. So it covers systemic inequities in data and data infrastructure, underrepresentation in university research, scholarship, and knowledge building, and geographic distribution of resources due to historical and contemporary injustice. So calling on these specific ULink projects, which bring folks from different disciplines, engaging with communities together, we can talk about systemic inequities in data and data infrastructure, namely the anti-bias training across the data lifecycle, early childhood system integration, and facial profiling projects. Data and how it is used is essential to driving narratives of inferiority or superiority, criminality and innocence, worthiness and unworthiness, right? Data absolutely don't speak for themselves, right? Without providing context, especially historical context, data is often interpreted through each individual's preconceived understandings of the world, of what causes the things that we see distributed across different neighborhoods. And this makes interdisciplinary research especially important. The numbers need to be paired with narrative and history. It's always important to understand what the meaning and impact of the data is. So what is the next step after doing this research with facial profiling? How will that impact and lead to racial equity in our communities, right? What can we learn that we can apply and work against the inequitable systems that we have? Further, we have to recognize that the data is where data is noticeably missing, right? Especially proportionally smaller populations. So in terms of having an accurate sense of what's going on in each neighborhood. We have some level of data, but sometimes it doesn't get as granular as we would want it to be, right? So if there are gaps in information for historically marginalized and disinvested communities like the West Grove, we can seek those out, right? There's a level of action and autonomy there. And once we have that data, what is the next step? What is the action? There are also, these ULink projects also bring up systemic inequities in terms of underrepresentation within university research, scholarship, and knowledge building. And several of the ULink projects you just heard about focus on this underrepresentation, specifically of Black and Indigenous voices at the university. The university, like other institutions, serves as its own kind of like system of historical and contemporary inequities that we have to push against at times and have conversations about how we move forward. As was said, there are long unanswered questions that we must push forward with. Further, there's systemic inequities that have driven geographic distribution of resources, opportunities, hazards, and stressors due to historical and contemporary institutional and structural racism, with segregation in the form of redlining and Jim Crow as a major pathway between structural racism and what we see on the ground. Geography can clearly demonstrate inequities, and it can be used to direct solutions. Black communities in Miami-Dade County have had the most exposure to these forms of structural racism. And that's demonstrated in a lot of the projects that we see. Several of the projects spoke about housing quality, cost, and crowding, particularly for Black communities. We can be thinking about what we can learn from history and think, are we developing Miami-Dade County in an equitable way? Or are corporate gentrification and displacement replicating historical inequities? As most questions, it's not an either or, but what are the ways that we can intervene? All of our systems have the ability to reinforce or combat existing racism in the system. So moving forward, I would say a second key idea is that to make progress, we must have uncomfortable conversations about race, racism, and privilege in intersectional ways. So I was really excited that so many of the projects involved conversations and facilitated conversations by a range of different folks and inclusion of different folks in the facilitation, in the planning, et cetera, right? We need to be talking about key things so they're not taboo and that we are facing key issues around race and racism rather than avoiding them or using roundabout ways of talking about it. We need to be comfortable with hearing the words race and racism, right? It needs to be commonplace. So while we have these kinds of talks and events, it is also important to make sure that we're having these conversations in smaller groups and settings, department meetings, grand rounds, in operating bays. There might be a conversation that comes up. There's different kinds of settings that we are you're talking about race, but you're not mentioning race and you're not mentioning racism. And so we must normalize these kinds of conversations within our everyday spaces so that it's not just an afterthought, right? In particular, I've thought about, COVID vaccination and some of the planning around that. And we knew ahead of time certain directions and the fault lines of inequities. But we didn't appropriately plan for those patterns that we already knew about. And so when inequity is an afterthought, justice will always be delayed, and justice delayed is justice denied. So I would say that we need to be planning for equity. It should not be an afterthought. It should be a primary consideration. And then the third key idea, I would say, that Ijeoma is talking through or emphasizes is not to stay in the conversation stage. Conversations are meant to drive change. So don't forget to do. So we must move outside of the ivory tower in order to impact communities rather than just admiring racial and ethnic inequities, right? So in social epidemiology, it's no longer sufficient to just document inequities. What are we going to do? And how can we evaluate different initiatives to try to intervene and change things systemically? So we have to think about institutions. So how do we function as a city? Much of that is tied to how we invest in our community. So a participatory budgeting process may be more representative, right? Are we investing more in police on criminalization or rather than in education and infrastructure? Are they balanced? How can we promote more representation from Black and Indigenous PIs in future ULINK projects, for example, right? Like, how do we do that? And I think being able to take it one step at a time and making this effort to both talk about it and do something very key is where we're moving towards. So I'm very excited about all of these ULINK projects. I'm particularly excited because this also has, can be leading to a lot more. And a lot of these teams are poised to seek more funding, and that is part of their plan, right? So I just want to present a kind of funding opportunity that I'm involved with, which is the interdisciplinary research leaders. So the current theme is by coincidence, structural racism, right? So structural racism in healthcare and structural racism in community health and well-being. And so this is an opportunity for these teams or other teams that might be working outside of this to apply and get further funding to get to the doing, right? So this is particularly focused on not documenting impact of structural racism and racist policies, but getting to some elements of its solutions. So this might be of interest to the folks who presented today. Thinking of a 3-year commitment involving 1 community leader or organizer and 2 researchers from different fields, different disciplines, aiming for a true partnership, a true participation across the different folks, and being able to invest in multiple different ways. So applications can be accessed here, and I will leave it here, and I'll drop the link in the chat. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Zinzi. Thank you for the plug for your great work at Robert Wood Johnson. It looks like we don't really have substantive time for questions, so I think we can let everyone go a little bit early. You have our information. Please reach out to us if you want us to connect you with the team that you find their work interesting and you have questions. We're happy to continue the conversation. Thanks to Zinzi. Thank you to the Vice Provost for Research and Scholarship for all of her support of this work. Meg Homer at the One Book, One You program. Eve Oliveris, couldn't do it without you. And of course, all of these amazing teams. It's seriously such a pleasure to work with all of you. We think this is really exciting work. So happy to see this happening here. And thanks to everyone else for joining us.
Thank you, Alec.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.